St. Mark's Cathedral acknowledges that we gather on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people who are still here, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the life of all the Coast Salish tribes. God be with you. Let us pray. Holy One, it is with a sense of your presence that we gather here in community, and for those who are on Zoom gathering as well. Be always present with us in our lives. Guide us with your spirit of grace and wisdom in it all. May our time this morning be time of fellowship and fruitful spiritual journeying together. We give thanks for Debbie and for her witness in the world and to the church. In all that we do and all that we are, may we be guided by your Christ, our beacon of hope and healing in all things. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Kathy, I think my computer has, if you'll put the X sound button, it will mute it. I apologize. Okay. Welcome, everyone, and greetings to those who are on Zoom as well. We're delighted that you're here and so delighted to have Debbie Thomas with us as part of our Wisdom School curriculum. Just a few housekeeping matters. You have found the snacks, and I'm delighted for that. Coffee and tea and water service are over here. Bathrooms, women's off this side of the stage, men's down the hallway off this side of the stage. There's all gender bathroom one flight up on this side, and either all the way to the 5th floor on the elevator or all the way to the top of the stairs on this side are all gender bathroom single stalls. We're delighted that you're here. If you need anything along the way, please do let us know. I do have copies of Debbie's latest book released earlier this year, A Faith of Many Rooms, available for purchase for $22, which is really just the cost to purchase the books and have them here. So just see me across the morning if you'd like a copy. And I bet she would even sign it if you asked her nicely. Debbie Thomas is familiar to many of us because she has become one of the wonderfully leading and insightful authors and writers and formation leaders in the Episcopal Church. She writes regularly for the Christian Century magazine. She recently finished a long tenure as the formation minister at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Palo Alto, California, where she and her husband live. And she is now in seminary at Church Divinity School of the Pacific. And we are just so delighted to have you, Debbie, join us this morning. Will you greet Debbie Thomas?
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Good morning and welcome. It's just a privilege to be here with all of you today. I know that clearing a Saturday morning in the midst of busy lives is not easy. So I thank you for making the time to be together, whether in person or on Zoom. I'm really grateful for your presence. So I want to begin by just mapping out what the morning will look like so you all know what to expect. We're going to move through 3 sessions together between now and 12:30. At the start of each session, I'm going to invite you into the Emmaus Road story and experience from a particular angle, and then offer you some of my own thoughts and reflections as a way to kickstart your own. This is not going to be just me talking at you for 3 hours, I promise. At that point, after I share a little bit, I will pause and I will give you some prompts to work with, which will show up on the screen. And you'll be free at that point for about 20 to 30 minutes to respond to those prompts in whatever way you feel comfortable doing. You might choose to journal, and if you don't have writing utensils with you, there's paper and pens right here. You're welcome to grab. You might choose to just sit and meditate. I know the weather is not fantastic, but if you are brave, you could venture out and walk a little bit. Basically, however you process, you're welcome to do that for those 20 minutes. And when that time of reflection is over, I will regather us and we'll have some time for conversation. First around your tables or in breakout rooms on Zoom, and then back together in plenary. We will do that entire sequence 3 times with breaks in between. But of course, I want you to feel totally comfortable to take breaks as you need them to grab coffee or whatever you need. Are there any questions about just straight up logistics? Okay. I'd like to say one more thing before we start. So as you know, we are going to spend the morning thinking and talking about lament, which would be a hard and tender thing to do even at the very best of times. Right now, though, just days after a very contentious and very consequential election, it's going to feel, I imagine, even more jagged and costly to engage with this. I will be totally honest with you and say that I am here this weekend still feeling raw and stunned and sad. And if that is the case for you as well, please know that that is okay. It is okay to show up as you are. It's okay to be unsettled, unsure, undone. And if anything, my prayer is simply that we will all feel safe enough here to be undone together. So I invite you to move very gently through the material that we're going to cover. Pace yourself, take in only what you can this morning, and please honor what your body is telling you. If you need to take a break, take a break. And most of all, I ask that we hold this space for each other with as much reverence and care as possible. When others speak, listen deeply from a place of curiosity and love. And when you speak, please do so from your experience only. Don't presume to speak about or on behalf of anyone else. And of course, whatever we share around our tables today, please hold in confidence unless you have explicit permission to do otherwise. Okay. Let's begin by just landing for a few minutes. Just becoming aware of what we are carrying into this time and space and asking the Spirit of God to ground us and hold us and prepare us. So I invite you to sit comfortably and close your eyes if you would like. Allow your feet to feel the firmness of the floor beneath you. Allow your body to relax into the chair that is supporting you. Become aware of any tension you are carrying in your neck, your shoulders, your arms, your core, your legs. And move as best as you can right now from that awareness to slow, gentle release. Consider for a moment the earth beneath us and all around us, grounding you, nurturing you, and offering its many gifts of beauty and stability to you. Consider the presence of the sacred, however you understand that, holding you together right now, whispering to you that you are loved, known, held, and safe. Take a moment now to bring awareness to your breath. Long, deep inhales and long, slow exhales. As you breathe in, receive the invitation and generosity of this community, reminding you that you are welcome. Your thoughts and ideas are welcome. Your questions, doubts, longings, and sorrows are welcome. As you breathe out, offer yourself permission for these next few hours to rest, to pause from worry, vigilance, and duty, and simply be. As you continue to breathe deeply and slowly, hear this invitation in the form of a prayer written by poet and activist Cole Arthur Riley. God of the moved and the unmoved, move our spirits. Remind us of the beauty and the necessity in our tears. Bring into focus our child selves that wailed without shame. Remind us that our need is not a nuisance. As we have grown calloused from the overwhelming helplessness of mass information, call us back into a wholeness and a nuance that honors the dignity of mourning. Bring us into proximity with the wisely vulnerable, that they may teach us true courage. Give us aids in our anguish to journey with us in and out of sorrow. Grant us ears to hear our own grief and to welcome it into our body as a friend once lost and now found again. Amen. And as you're ready, come back into this room in this place. So the journey we are taking today is rooted in a biblical story that is actually one of my longtime favorites. It's a story that we usually read and hear about during the season of Easter, but I think that what it has to offer us by way of its generosity and its complexity is appropriate for us right now, for this moment we find ourselves in. So I want to begin just by having us hear it together. Greg, could you give us the next slide? A reading from Luke chapter 24. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it, just as the women had said, but they did not see him. Next slide. Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. What is lament? It is very simply an expression of grief, disappointment, bewilderment, anger, indignation, grievance, or agony. In the Christian tradition, which draws on its rich Jewish roots for this practice, lament is a form of prayer, a form of address to God. It is an unfiltered, unflinching cry of a breaking human heart, aimed straight at its creator. It is a prayer that very bravely names a disconnect, a dissonance, even a sense of betrayal between the goodness, hope, and justice we long for and the brokenness, harm, and injustice that surround us. Theologian Richard Rohr writes that of every kind of prayer we find in the Bible, lament might be the most honest, because it is a form stripped of all pretense, all posturing, all simple piety. It is unguarded, naked, vulnerable. In the Emmaus story we just heard, lament begins with a would-be stranger approaching two travelers on a road and inviting them to unburden their hearts in his presence. What are you discussing? As in, how goes it with your souls today? Why are you downcast? Tell me your story, your real story. I really want to know. Of course, the travelers don't recognize this stranger who's asking the question, but still something stirs within them, something that gives them permission to speak truthfully. And they respond to his question with one tiny, heart-rending line that says it all. "But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." But we had hoped. I wonder how many times and in how many contexts each one of us have uttered those words. But we had hoped the marriage would survive. We had hoped Dad's cancer would stay in remission. We had hoped not to miscarry a third time. We had hoped our nation would choose differently. We had hoped for an end to this divisiveness, this toxicity, this hatred. What I'd like to do in this first session is to give you a sense of where I'm coming from personally as I approach the Emmaus story, because our histories can so profoundly shape the ways in which we approach lament. And it's important to become aware of that. So as I share my story, I invite you to reflect on your own, which might be very similar to mine or completely different. We are Easter people. That is a line that I heard very, very often growing up a preacher's daughter in a very conservative evangelical home in Boston. In fact, Easter was my favorite holiday when I was a little girl, even more so than Christmas, all of those shiny gift boxes under the tree notwithstanding. As a child, I loved waking up before dawn on those chilly New England mornings every March or April, putting on a new flowery pink dress and driving down to the pier with my parents for our annual sunrise service. I loved even more the trumpets that accompanied the choir's opening procession in our main Easter service. The impassioned preaching, the pews stuffed with people in dapper clothes and pastel hats, the Hallelujah chorus that finished off the morning. And most of all, I loved that moment in the service when my father stood up and shouted, "He is risen." And all of us shouted back, "He is risen indeed." But in my faith community, being Easter people was a responsibility. It was a job that went on long after the trumpets were placed back in their boxes and the scent of the Easter lilies faded away. That job was to present a certain face to the world, a joyful face, a victorious face, a face of perpetual celebration. This meant that the sacred stories I inherited as a child were happily ever after stories with very particular plot lines. There was the deliverance plot, the healing plot, the uplift plot, the faded scars are okay, but open wounds are not plot. If people ventured to share their struggles at all, they always rounded out the edges of those struggles, making them neat and pretty. I heard testimonies of deliverance and victory and healing all the time at church. And to this day, I believe that the people who made them were earnest and faithful. But something about those stories also rang hollow. They sounded like redacted legal documents. I could see key lines blocked out in black Sharpie on every page. Grief, actual sloppy, undignified grief, barely showed up in those documents at all. And if it did, it was always couched in platitude or apology. So it didn't occur to me for years that people can express sorrow or disappointment or horror or even full-on rage as acts of faith, as prayer. I practiced a grief-averse faith for a long time, well into adulthood. I practiced it even when its narrowness began to close in on me, making my spiritual life small and flat and shallow. I slapped bright theological bows on circumstances that called for so much more nuance. I said things like, everything happens for a reason, and God never gives us more than we can bear. And don't forget, rejoice is a command in the Bible. I felt my own inauthenticity every time I said these things, but I said them anyway. And then life happened, as it inevitably will. I left home, finished college and grad school, got married, and became a mother. And within a few short years of bringing our precious daughter into the world, my husband and I found ourselves learning and speaking a very different vocabulary of faith. A vocabulary filled with words like desperation, bewilderment, agony, terror. We watched stunned and largely helpless as our daughter's beautiful sensitivity and responsiveness to the world morphed into anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, depression, anorexia, and self-harm. It was as if all the lights in the house of faith went out at once, leaving us in deep shadow as we tried and tried and tried to hold our baby back from the abyss. A few years after these life-threatening struggles for our daughter began, our 14-year-old son had a bike accident on his way home from school. He remembers waking up on the asphalt with a cracked helmet, a few scrapes, and what turned into a vicious post-concussive headache that left him literally bedridden for 3 years. When my daughter first started battling mental illness, and again during the first weeks and months after my son's accident, I received many varieties of Christian encouragement. And all of it was couched in the language of a lament-free Christianity. God is deepening your prayer life through this. Just have faith. God has a plan, and it's only ever for your good. Your children are being prepared for something amazing. This will end in healing. That is God's absolute promise. What I wanted but did not receive was an invitation to scream, to cry, to throw things, to pound my fists at God and fall apart. I realized then, in fits and starts, that the faith I had inherited and cultivated since childhood was much too small and too stingy for the reality my family was facing. Long story short, the experience of mothering 2 children in pain pretty much demolished what I now call my happy, clappy Christianity. And for a while, actually, it left me stranded in the rubble, not knowing if I would ever find my way back to a viable faith again. But we had hoped. We had hoped our babies would be spared. We had hoped that the second specialist, the third pain med, the fourth medical procedure, the 6th therapist would finally bring us some relief. We had hoped that the prayers of so many loving, faithful people over so many months would bend God's heart and lead to cures. In the Emmaus story, it is Cleopas and his companion who have to face the utter defeat of their hopes and dreams. If you know the Gospels, you know that Jesus' followers spent 3 years in his presence, watching him do things and say things that turned their worlds upside down. By the time Holy Week rolls around, they are dizzy with hope. They are drunk with the anticipation of good and beautiful things that this Jesus is going to bring about in their lives. Based on his teachings and his actions, they envision an end to the Roman Empire, liberation from ethnic, cultural, economic, geographic, religious, and racial oppression. Promise of peace, the promise of rest, the promise of plenty. And then it all comes to absolutely nothing. Nothing more than a broken man on a lonely cross on a hill they call the Skull. But we had hoped for so much. It always startles me when I remember that the Emmaus story is an Easter Sunday story. On the highest of all of our Christian feast days, that very day when we flower our crosses and blow our trumpets and shout our alleluias around lily-strewn baptismal fonts, on that day, the risen Jesus shows up on a quiet road and invites his wounded friends into an honest, unfiltered articulation of lament. He does not lead with premature consolation or toxic positivity. He does not tell Cleopas and his companion to hurry up and get over it. Instead, he leaves time and space for lament, for sacred remembrance, for the speaking out of deep pain and dashed hopes and thwarted dreams. The Emmaus journey teaches us that expressing sadness over what we've lost, or naming and mourning those precious things we wanted but did not receive, these are holy places to begin. These are not departures from faith. These are signs of bold, deep, stubborn, unrelenting faith. To lament is not to walk away. It is, in fact, to cling. It is to grab on tight and wrestle till dawn, get up in God's face with the reckless courage of a thwarted child, to insist that no matter what, we will not let go without a blessing. In my own life, I can tell you that learning to embrace lament has literally saved my faith. It has kept me from hardening into a small, embittered life. It has kept my heart from hardening. It has brought me back from pretty treacherous descents into resentment and cynicism and jealousy. And it has taught me to celebrate even the tiniest eruptions of joy in my life and in my kids' lives. In short, it has brought me down to what Quaker theologian Parker Palmer describes as ground on which it is safe to stand. Writing about his own battles with grief, Palmer writes that he used to live at great elevation as a Christian. Until sorrow came along and reordered his life, he visualized faith as an up, 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 and away mountain climb, in which he would attain greater and greater heights of spiritual maturity until finally he would touch the hand of God. What he learned in the throes of depression is that deep spiritual growth actually happens in the opposite direction. The danger of living at high elevation is that every single time you fall, you have to fall a long distance, a distance that will make impact brutal. Every landing, if it does not kill you outright, will shatter your bones. But if you allow the Spirit of God to press you down onto ground on which it is safe to stand, then you can fall all day long. And the secure, steady ground beneath your body, the ground of God's own being, will hold you. This might be controversial, but I think one reason Christians struggle to have a credible witness in the world these days is because we have failed to honor the prophetic power of lament. We have forgotten that in a bleeding world, lament needs to be the first language of the church, the place where we begin. Maybe in the wake of this election, in the throes of climate change, in the midst of wars and rumors of wars, we are being asked to take seriously what it means to be a transformed people in a world that is littered with graves. Among people so harried, so exhausted, and so desperate that the good news actually hurts. Maybe in such a world, a faithful first response needs to be lament. Lament expressed as compassionate silence, tears of solidarity, walking alongside the shattered on broken roads, inviting them to grieve in our presence. In her beautiful book, This Here Flesh, Cole Arthur Riley puts it this way: I am most disillusioned with the Christian faith when in the presence of a Christian who refuses to name the traumas of this world. I am suspicious of anyone who can observe colonization, genocide, and decay in the world and not be stirred to lament. Conversely, when I watch somebody name what should not be and earnestly question God about it, I immediately become a fraction of the skeptic I am. Lament is a very compelling apologetic. I think I would take Riley's claim one step further and say communal lament is a very compelling apologetic. We Americans often practice an island spirituality, a spirituality that is so individualistic. In our Lone Ranger culture, we are not encouraged to live with a deep, abiding sense of our connectedness. And this makes biblical lament hard for us because in Scripture, lament is communal. It's the pain of a whole people expressed together. Lament insists that we are not islands. The pain of one is the pain of all. And in this way, lament resists that American myth of self-sufficiency and pulls us deep into the fabric of God's whole creation. But lament also resists our tendency to turn our sorrows into abstractions. We are very thinky people, we Episcopalians in particular. But to restate the obvious, grief requires us to feel, to mourn and to hurt and to ache. It is full-bodied. It is a gift of the incarnation. We need to feel it in our hands and our feet and our heart and our guts. That's why it's hard. It costs us emotionally, and so we avoid it. In his powerful book on grief, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, Jungian analyst Francis Weller writes that the two primary sins of Western civilization are amnesia and anesthesia. We forget and we go numb. Lament asks us to refrain from both. It asks us to revisit those unhealed wounds from our pasts, both personal and collective, and to allow those wounds to move us and motivate us. It asks us to dwell in the stories and traumas of our ancestors, the people we've lost, the people we've harmed, the people we've ignored, the people we have rendered invisible to secure our own comfort. To be clear, I still believe that we are Easter people. But if you look closely, you'll see that our ancient Easter stories make a lot of room for ache and fear and regret and sorrow too. In the Emmaus story, when the travelers share their dashed hopes with a stranger they don't yet recognize, the risen Christ takes his time to listen to them. On the very day he conquers the grave, on that very day when you'd think he'd be shouting his victory from the rooftops, instead he spends the evening on a quiet road in the company of his heartbroken friends. What would it be like to follow in their footsteps, in his footsteps? What would it be like to take Jesus' invitation seriously? But we had hoped. But we had hoped. But we had hoped. So what I want to do now is pause and give you some questions to think about. Greg, would you give us the next slide? These are going to give you some time to process what I've just talked about. I'll just read them out and then talk about how we're going to do this. So the Emmaus journey begins with lament. Reflect for a few minutes on your own history and relationship with this practice. Is lament a part of your spiritual life? 2, we've explored some reasons, religious and cultural, why people of faith often resist lament. Do any of these reasons resonate with you? Can you think of others? And 3, but we had hoped. Sit with this phrase for a few minutes and allow yourself to enter into its honesty, its vulnerability, its pain. If you were to complete the phrase in your own words, what would you say? What hopes would you list? If changing the pronoun helps you write more honestly, then start with, but I had hoped, and proceed to make your list from there. And if you find yourself resisting, that's fine. Just reflect on that resistance. Where is it coming from, and what is it about this practice that turns you off or feels hard? So I'm going to ask that let's spend 20 minutes on this. So until 10:30, and again, you are free to write, you are free to just sit, meditate, you're free to leave this room if you want to. I do ask that for these 20 minutes, we hold silence in this space. So if you need to talk, you're free to go out of this room. And so we'll regather at 10:30 and then have some time for conversation. And if you need paper and pens, it's right there. Thank you. Okay, let's regather. Hello, everyone on Zoom. So I do want to have a little more time to talk, but I want to pull it together into plenary so we can share from each other, share with each other, learn from each other. So the way this is going to work, we want to make sure our friends on Zoom can hear everything. So if you would like to share something out from your table, just raise your hand and Wendy will bring a mic to you. So just hang on a second till you have the mic so folks online can share. And those of you who are online, if you would like to share, we'd love to hear from you as well. So just raise your hand or use your little hand emoji and Steve will make sure that we pause and hear what you want to say as well. Thank you. So what came up in your breakout rooms or around your tables that you'd like to share? I heard a lot of talking, so I know that things happen.
Our culture wants us to be positive. Lamenting is hard work. So we find it very easy to avoid it.
Yes, absolutely. It's true. Thank you.
Not lamenting.
Right up against your mouth, but we
Okay,
here you go.
sometimes we're afraid to lament because we have a very tiny vision of God and we have to protect him.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, one of the metaphors that I use for that is like God is this china teacup at the very edge of a table, and if you nudge too much, it might fall over and like shatter into a million pieces. Yeah, so it took me a long time to shed that particular image of God. Others.
I um I resisted lamenting for a long time. But sometimes I do. So in prayer, I cry, I plead, I beg, but then I tell myself, you've got to be tough. You can't become holy without suffering. Suffering is essential for transformation, so Christ can change your heart. But I was thinking that I was never a mother, so I didn't really learn about love, which my friend says, well, not exactly. But putting another person's life before yourself is the real test. And I thought, oh, no, impossible. But it's not impossible because I'm learning it now. So you just have to nurture love in your prayers instead of, saying bad things about your neighbors or something, just nurture love. And it actually works. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, in that sense, lament is it's an expression of love. It's because we love so much, whether it's a person or something that we care about for the world or for our country. It's because we love so much that our hearts break.
In our group, a couple of things seem to come to the fore. One is that in order to really lament and grieve, we have to feel the feelings. No matter when the cause of the grief happened, it could have been forever ago. But if the feelings haven't been felt, then they haven't been released and the grief is still there. And we talked about how that goes into expression through your body. And then at the very end of our conversation, I expressed that I thought, first of all, what we're doing today is really good and it's really important and helpful. And it's not in and of itself getting into the grief because we aren't all here feeling necessarily. Some of us might be, but we aren't like really feeling it. And that's not what this gathering is designed for. However, I thought that if we had our leaders, clergy, in front of us lose it in their grief, feel their grief, that would be very helpful.
Thank you.
I at first was very uncomfortable getting angry, expressing anger toward God. And then I thought about the Psalms. I thought about the lament that comes in Psalms. And I thought there's a tradition for this. And that, there's a superstitious part of me that was concerned that expressing anger toward God would set something negative in motion. And I thought, no, that's not how this works. And the ability to both ask God for help and at this time ask, why haven't you answered my prayers? Why are you allowing me to suffer in this way? And then also being able to express anger and disappointment and doubt, making it possible to get through long periods of difficulty and suffering. If I felt that I had to hold that back, it would have made a difficult situation much more difficult.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Think over here, Wendy.
I was two different ideas were formative for me that are paradoxically kind of opposite, but they one, I was raised atheist existentialist. So there is no plan, there is no point. So just kind of live life. And then I got involved in recovery later. And in the 12-step world, there's a lot of emphasis on let go and let God. There's a lot of talk that is prosperity-ish, about God's will and prospering if you're aligned with it. And both of them say that you should just be accepting of the way things are. That hoping is we were talking a little bit about this at the table, the distinction between expectations and hope. That hoping is blurred with expectations and having, demands of God, and that doesn't lead to happiness. So you need to just surrender and just be accepting of everything. And as Steve said, the society really rewarded me for being stoic and for being unemotional and being the level-headed one who's good in a crisis. And it's possible that some qualities of that helped me survive for a time. But neither of those allows for actually feeling feelings.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the distinction. I appreciate that. Anyone else or anyone on Zoom? Love to hear from you. Okay. Okay.
Pamela Bradburn. I'm the thinking about lament is very interesting to me, and I find that I do not turn on God. I think for a very long time realized God does not move people around and make events happen, and that view of God, that old view of God, is not really realistic. So so I'm wondering, is there anything wrong with that?
No. The short answer, I think, is no. Yeah, I don't think that lament is a turning on God. In fact, I think it's a drawing closer. It's a holding on tight and saying, I'm going to keep engaging with you, even though I don't understand, even though my picture of you is changing, even though I feel in my humanness disappointed, I'm not going to let you go. I'm going to hang on tight. So, in a way, it's a sign of weirdly, it's a sign of intimacy with God, I'd say. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Appreciate it. Oh, let's get the mic to you. So yeah.
I just wanted to tag on to what you said, right? It's us not letting go because we love, right? It's deep.
Yeah.
But there's also this stream of belief that I'm clinging on to a thing that does love me in that way, right? Like it's, I think what you said, right? It's the ground that's safe enough to stand, or Parker Palmer, right? Like there's a partnership or a relationship, right? That I can lament and believe that you love me enough to let me scream at the ceiling and say, come down.
Yeah.
Right? Just like I would, anyway, yeah, that.
Yes. Yes, I think it is. It takes a certain amount of trust in the relationship to lament, to believe that the relationship can hold that. It's strong enough to hold it. Yeah.
I was just going to say, you cite Walter Brueggemann, and I know in his idea of a costly loss of lament, he says it's the prayerful setting that to God, things are not as they should be, and God, I expect that you're going to help me with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which is the embodiment of the Psalms, as Lisa mentioned. But the other conversation we had at the table, several of us kind of hung on to it, was this, but I had hoped. It's a brilliant way of inviting us to do the lament. And, but I had hoped that the generational family systems things wouldn't get repeated again in my generation. Damn it.
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes. Thank you. Absolutely. Yes, here.
Should we be asking why we're suffering over this or that? I don't. Sometimes I'll get an answer, but not very often. It would be very helpful to know why.
Yes, it would. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's not a matter of should, it's just that let's be honest and say that we're going to, because we are human and we are going to ask why. And we don't need to be, to feel like that's some kind of sin or a sign of unfaithfulness. It's just the human condition that, we have this long sort of eschatological vision of the realm that God is bringing about. And we trust in that. There's going to be beauty, there's going to be justice, there's going to be wholeness. And we're not there. We are so desperately not there. And living in that dissonance, we are going to ask why. That is just part of the deal, and it's okay.
And post on Zoom.
Sure.
Hi, thank you. Great shares. I was just sharing with the group earlier that I spent a lifetime doing social activism and political activism, and my lament just feels tired. And I wanted to retire because I'm getting close to that age of retiring. And so I just want to share one of the things I was meditating on. I didn't share it with my group, but I'll share it with everyone here. Is a few years back, I had the joy of going on a Holy Land pilgrimage, and we actually walked on the road to Emmaus.
Lovely.
And something happened when I was there. My sandal literally broke. And luckily I had packed 2 pairs of sandals. So I was thinking, I was meditating on that today, thinking about what that metaphor might mean for my life right now. It might mean that I have that spare pair of sandals, and maybe God wants me to keep on marching.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share? Yes.
I think the conflict for me in learning to practice lament and embrace it is that it was awkward to learn when and where,
Hmm.
because it could be socially isolating. And if you lament inadvertently in a place where lament is seen as reprehensible or offensive, you don't get that feedback, that welcoming feedback of, good job, go deep. And so that's the part of the learning curve that's really hard for me.
Yes, thank you for naming that. I mean, I think if you look at other world cultures, they have so much, there are containers for this. There are rituals, there are, you know, if someone is in mourning, they wear different clothes, for example. So when you approach someone, you approach with tenderness, you know that they are struggling. Or, you know, in some cultures that you do different things in your house. The house is arranged differently, or there's cleaning, there's people who come and like wail, right, to express these things bodily. Our culture, unfortunately, has very little of that. And so we don't have these safe places. And what I would love is for the church to become that kind of place, even more so, right, where we can do that work and know that it is going to be held. Yeah. We have time for one more person. Is there anyone else who wants to share? Okay, let's do a 2-minute stretch and move around break, and then we'll back. Okay, friends, let's regather, please. Come on back. I promise I'll give you more time to talk. I'm sorry, yeah, I know this is as loud as I get. I'm sorry.
It's more like a retreat. Is that supposed to be?
Sort of, yeah. Okay. Thank you all for sharing so openly and engaging. Really appreciate it. So in the second part, we're gonna start moving into what hope can look like in the Emmaus story. And again, I want to repeat what I said at the beginning. We are all in different places today. And so take in as much of this as you can. You might just be in a place where you're like, no, I'm gonna just stay with the lament now. And that is totally fine. So this might be just something you hear and maybe come back to, and that's fine. In a poem that I love entitled A Brief for the Defense, American poet Jack Gilbert writes this: we must risk delight. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. If the locomotive of the Lord runs us down, we should give thanks that the end had magnitude. We must admit there will be music despite everything. So the Emmaus journey begins with lament, but then it invites us, as we are ready, to take some risks. It invites us to hold sorrow and hope together in an honest and freshly creative tension. It asks us to look up and down and out and around and ask what we might not have had the bandwidth to ask before. Is there more? What do I not yet know? What have I not yet wondered? Beyond the God I have perhaps grown familiar and complacent with, who and what and where is God? How might my story of the sacred still be incomplete? It might become possible, if we are willing to entertain these questions, to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. I'm not going to read the entire Emmaus passage again. I just want to highlight a few excerpts for this next reflection. So just listen. Then he said to them, was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory? Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, stay with us. It is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. That same hour, they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. If you could live inside a story, which story would you choose? My husband and I started asking our children this question when they were preschoolers. Every night, our son and daughter would curl up on our bed in their pajamas, their hair still damp from their baths, and we would spread their favorite storybooks all around us. Of course, they would beg for one more story, two more stories, three more, and we would read aloud long past their bedtimes, imagining ourselves into all kinds of fictional worlds. In the early years, we would debate the merits of Winnie the Pooh's 100-Acre Wood over Robin Hood's Sherwood Forest, or compare Peter Pan's Neverland to Dr. Seuss's Whoville, or pretend that we lived in a pig pen under Charlotte's very famous web. As the children's reading abilities grew, so did our imagined destinations. Over the years, we cycled through Narnia, Wonderland, Terabithia, and Oz. For a while, my daughter's heroine was Anne of Green Gables, so we lived on Prince Edward Island and bemoaned our carrot-colored hair. My son's hero for a long time was, of course, Harry Potter, so we spent many months at Hogwarts Castle learning spells and pretending to play Quidditch. Our Middle-earth phase lasted, oh my goodness, for years and required many decisions about J.R.R. Tolkien's elaborate story world. Would we live in Rivendell with the elves or in the Shire with the hobbits? Would we venture into Mirkwood, visit Lothlorien, or hazard the long darkness of Moria? One day when my son was around 12 years old, he looked up from whatever book he was reading, and he said, does God write good stories? Because forever is going to be really boring if God doesn't. I had to sit with that one for a minute because it was not a question I'd ever thought about before. But eventually I told my son, yeah, I think God writes pretty good stories. Over the years, as I've returned to that exchange and pondered it, I have wondered if one of the reasons that we often struggle to hold on to hope is because we don't allow God to reframe and re-enliven the stories that we tell about our lives and our losses and our yearnings and our sorrows. We don't quite trust God's version of the very good story. Of course, given the world we live in, it is not surprising that we get stuck in narratives that strip away our hope. Narratives that highlight one part of the truth of hardship and the truth of loss and the truth of brokenness, without recognizing that those narratives, if they are left to themselves, might stymie our journeys, might even over time distort our experience of who God really is. Perhaps we need a master writer, someone who does in fact tell very good stories, to become our holy editor, to unfold our narratives into the larger and more redemptive narrative of salvation. The gospel writer tells us that when the Emmaus travelers first see Jesus, they stand still looking sad. They stand still. Their movement stops. The travelers find themselves so overwhelmed by their narratives of pain that they stop journeying altogether. They find themselves unable to take even one small step forward into their new life. I'm grateful for this detail in the story because it describes so perfectly what we human beings do, right? We get mired down, we get stuck, we get trapped. When the road ahead of us bends in a way that we did not expect or want, we just freeze and feel like we have been abandoned. So, what does Jesus do when the Emmaus travelers get stuck? First, as we've already noticed, he invites them to lament. What are you talking about? What's on your heart? What story are you living in? And he creates a safe space for the telling of that story. But when they're done, only when they're done, when the story of their sorrow has been articulated, Jesus takes that story and then offers it back to them. And as he does so, the story changes. It becomes bigger and deeper and older and wiser. A far more layered story than the travelers had known before. Here's what you're leaving out, Jesus basically says to them. Here's what you are not seeing. Let me tell you about the larger narrative we are actually living in. A narrative that, yes, includes sorrow and loss and death, but also life, also hope, also joy. When Jesus tells a story of his own suffering and death, he restores its context, its nuance, and its mysterious, paradoxical power. When Jesus tells the story, the death of the Messiah finds its place in a sweeping cosmic arc of redemption that has in fact spanned centuries. When Jesus tells the story, his listeners discover that really it is roomy enough to hold and heal and redeem their disappointments. When Jesus tells a story, the hearts of his listeners burn. To be clear, it is not the case that Jesus denies the truthfulness of his companions' lament. He does not tell them that crucifixion didn't really happen, or it wasn't that big a deal, or you're not going to carry any scars from seeing me hanging on a cross. In fact, as you know, in many of the Easter narratives we read in Scripture, Jesus shows his disciples his own scars on his resurrected body, his own testimonies of suffering. There are marks of lament that remain even on Christ's glorified body. So what this suggests to me is that the Emmaus experience does not offer hope as a cancellation of lament. Rather, it invites hope into our lament. It urges us to leave room for more meaning, more context, more possibility, more shades of color and sound and texture and touch. As writer Jeff Chu puts it, when we lament, we cry out to God, sometimes beyond our intelligibility. Yet somehow we are promised lament transforms a screaming into the void into an act of trust. What might otherwise be an end thus becomes a beginning of openness, a beginning of processing, a beginning of filtering, a beginning to more listening, a beginning of necessary grief, a beginning of growth in understanding myself, my relationship with my neighbors, and the world we inhabit. But how do we actually make this beginning? We might start by asking ourselves some really tough questions. What stories are we clenching tight in both fists that perhaps we need to hold more lightly? What stories have we linked so completely to our own happiness that we will not surrender them? Do these cherished stories of ours domesticate God in some way? Make God more palatable, less provocative, more manageable? Or do they leave room for the sacred to surprise, delight, provoke, and upend us? During the years when my kids were at the height of their health struggles, and I just plain had no idea how we were going to survive, I realized how many unhelpful stories I was clenching in my fists. Stories of a Santa Claus God, a giant gumball machine in the sky God, a master puppeteer God whose job one was to pull strings on my behalf and grant my loved ones immunity from suffering. Stories of a spirituality that was 100% transactional, as in, if I do A, God will do B. Actually, if I do A, then God will owe me B. Stories of my own power and capacity and responsibility that made no sense and were absolutely unsustainable. As in, if I just read the right books, if I just find the right healthcare provider, if I just make the most perfect, irresistible meal to entice my anorexic daughter, if I just keep the house quiet enough to ease my son's aching head, then I will wrest control back from this nightmare of chaos. I will fix what is broken. I will make my children well. I will be successful. Those stories had to be broken wide open. They had to give way to something much larger and truer and messier. For a while, some years ago, my kids got hooked on a TV series called Once Upon a Time. Has anyone heard of this? Yeah. Its premise, at least in season 1, was that all of our favorite well-known fairy tale characters have been cursed by a powerful evil queen and sent to live in exile here in our world, specifically in a town called Storybrooke in backwoods Maine. But the queen has wiped out their memories, so they have no idea who they really are or where they come from. Jiminy Cricket is a psychotherapist. Pinocchio's blue fairy is a nun. Snow White is a lonely school teacher named Mary Margaret, who has no idea that David, that cute guy lying in a coma at the local hospital, is Prince Charming, the love of her life. It falls to a little child, of course, to discover the truth, thwart the evil queen, and convince the inhabitants of Storybrooke that the story they think they're living in is only a partial one, that there is more, that there is magic. I think this is our work too, to remember that the story we are living in rests in the deeper and far more mysterious story of God, and to trust that God's story and ours are intimately connected, even when, especially when, we just can't see those connections clearly. As you well know, particularly this week, not all stories in our culture are benign. We live in a moment when our choices are both endless and consequential. If we want, we can choose a story about fear and scarcity, a story that leaves no room for fresh and unexpected movements of God's Spirit. If we want, we can choose a story steeped in nostalgia, a story that only ever looks backward, insisting that things should return to where they used to be. If we want, we can choose a story of gritted teeth and grim resolve, a story that reduces God to a taskmaster who just wants us to get the work done, no matter how dull and joyless it feels. Or we can choose a story about a God whose grace might come alive in new and wonderful ways, even in the rubble and the wreckage. Honestly, the stakes at this point are civilizational. So much depends on the kind of story we will choose to privilege, the kind of story we find the courage to share with people in the particular locations God has placed us in. So, hope on the Emmaus journey begins as we allow God to reshape our story. But it also begins, I think, when we allow the unfamiliar, the uncomfortable, and the unknown to break bread and feed us. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Emmaus story culminates around a table. When the two travelers reach their destination, the stranger gives them the option to say goodbye. He makes as if he's leaving, placing them in a position where they have to be intentional and definitive regarding him. Do they want him to stay? Are they willing to host a stranger? Do they desire to go deeper with this man who has made their hearts burn, or have they had enough? I always cringe a little bit when I get to this part of the story. I mean, What would have happened if Cleopas and his companion parted company with Jesus when they reached their home? How would their story have ended then? I am perpetually surprised and honestly a bit undone and maybe annoyed by Jesus's patience, which translates into his commitment to our freedom. He will not impose. He will not overpower. He will not coerce. He will make as if he's moving on, giving us the space and the time and the freedom to decide what we truly want. Do we desire to go deeper? Will we consent to welcome the stranger into our inner circle? Maybe Emmaus' hope lies in discovering the holy where we did not expect to find it and allowing that recognition to crack us wide open. And oh my goodness, this is hard because we so like and crave affinity. We prefer being with the people who share our interests, our priorities, our politics. We'd much rather extend our tables to the people who affirm our choices and confirm us in our certainties. But when Jesus steps into Cleopas's home, he becomes the host. He becomes the one who leads, who prays, who nourishes. It is when the stranger is given a place at the head of the table that the transformative power of communion is unleashed. In our very big world with its very big problems, it is so hard for us to trust in the transformative and holy power of small things. A bit of bread, a sip of wine, common table, shared meal, conversation. But the Emmaus story speaks so well to this paradoxical power, the power of the small and the commonplace to reveal the divine. God shows up during a quiet evening walk on a backwater road. God becomes known around our dinner tables. God reveals God's self when we take and bless and break and give. But we had hoped. Yes, we had, of course we had. So many things are so different than what we had hoped they would be. And yet, there is still more to the story. There is hope woven right into the lament. There is the risk and the possibility, and in fact, the assurance of delight. Greg, I'm going to ask you to pull up the next slide. So these are some questions for our next time of reflection. Jesus offers the Emmaus travelers hope by enlarging and contextualizing their stories of lament. Reflect on a story you are telling yourself these days about your life, your world, your hopes, your dreams. How might the Spirit be inviting you to deepen or enlarge this story? Where and how might the perspective of the stranger on the Emmaus road fill in some gaps? The Emmaus story culminates around a common table, a shared meal. It ends when the stranger is invited to host and makes sacred recognition possible. Imagine that you are being invited to Christ's table of new possibility, new nourishment, new visioning. What do you need to receive right now from this abundant table? What are you hungry for? And what do you have that you might share with others? So let's see, it's 11:40. Wow, time is flying. Does 15 minutes feel okay? At least begin with that. Okay, let's go 15 minutes and then have some time for conversation. Okay, let's regather. And I know that we are doing pretty intense work in a very compressed amount of time. Ideally, we'd have a lot more time and you could sit with these questions and because these are big questions. And so I hope that you'll carry them out from here. This doesn't have to in any way feel finished at the end of this time together. These are things for you to sort of let them compost longer. But in the interest of time, I wanted, if it's okay, just have a conversation in plenary. Is that okay with everyone? Yeah, all right. So again, I invite you here in the room and those of you who are on Zoom, as you were thinking about either of these questions or anything else that I said in the second section of the workshop, what came up for you?
We're going to talk with each other.
Because we're short on time, we're just gonna just go straight to talking together, if that's okay. Yeah.
Oh.
In reading the first reflection question, it made me realize that I have let go of the unhelpful stories, that I've recognized the unhelpful stories and let them go. And that's a really good place to be. But it's also, I have a chronic illness, which makes it not possible for me to work. But I still have hope that one day I will be able to work again, at least part-time. And so I still hold that hope out there. And I have dreams about what I want to do. And I don't want to go back to doing the work that I did before. I want to teach, I want to study to teach mindfulness meditation and to do be a mindfulness mentor and to be a spiritual mentor. And my experience with like intense suffering over a long period of time and that spiritual journey, I think has given me skills and knowledge that I can use to help other people on their journey. And that those are my hopes and dreams for myself, if that is ever possible.
Thank you. Those are beautiful hopes and dreams, and I think we share them with you. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Over here, Wendy. And Wendy, thank you for running around the room. We appreciate that.
Well, a couple things come to mind. One is that I had been telling myself the story that the person I voted for was going to miraculously win. If I looked at what I wrote, that would help. That through a variety of divine interventions, and that in that happening, then we would all live happily ever after, except for those who voted differently from me, in which case they'd all disappear or something. I'm not sure. But what's coming to me now is a much bigger picture that we are all of us in our country and beyond, of course, are a we. And I imagined sitting at the table with someone who voted for the other candidate and being able to connect with that person on a deep, a human level, and get beyond my very strong views of who they are and how, how inhuman I think they are, because that is not the truth. So that's what came to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for naming it. Appreciate that. Others?
Those on Zoom?
Oh, yeah, I sat for a long time with the idea of what my story was telling me. And it was really othering me and isolating me from community. And then I started thinking about being the stranger at the table, and Jesus as our role model and our brethren, and coming in the flesh, like, allows us to be more. And so sometimes we are that stranger at the table, like that is, or to feel that we are that stranger at the table, and to know that that is also a calling and a service to occupy that role and speak truths or say things that might be not understood at first or even unpopular, is also part of the story that that I took from the Emmaus scriptures. Like, oh, okay, we can show up in places also unexpected and unrecognized and still be the hands of service for the message.
Thank you so much. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful picture too of the vulnerability of that. It's not easy to show up at the table and be unrecognized or misunderstood from the get-go and still choose to stay and still engage in the conversation, as you said. Thank you for that. Others?
Yeah, I was struck by this process that when Jesus speaks with them on the road, that he is playing the role of rabbi, the teacher, right? And that's was my vocation. So there was something about that he starts by listening and then he reinterprets the story, puts it in this larger context, right? Which was clearly really important for their understanding. But the shift in the understanding is not the end of the story. It's that when he is sitting at the table, he breaks the bread, and there is a deeper revelation of that story and who this person is. And who this person is embodies this ultimate mystery that is at the heart of the universe. That is the nature of love, which is sacrificial, right? And so that's also the cross and the tomb and that sense of lament and loss. I was just there's a writer who made this connection of the tomb and the womb are simultaneously there in a sense, right? And so that we have to be in that space of darkness in order for new birth to come. So somehow all of that is
Yes.
mixed into this story.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I especially love that movement. You can't just stop at the intellectual reframing of the story. That happens on the road, but then something much more embodied has to happen around the table, right? Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Over here.
Okay, so this is much more what I would share in small group than really big public, but identifying with the lack of spiritual maturity, as we would call it, of the disciples, not seeing Jesus, that kind of thing. For me, being invited into accepting spiritual growth is a journey. And then when I was younger and didn't understand things and was walking on the road not recognizing Jesus is different than after I've broken bread with Jesus and seeing him. And there's something about the process of forgiving yourself for not being all grown up when you were first born.
Yes.
That resonates with me in that walk, and that in that I need constancy and love and community in order to embrace the scope of my narrative.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah. Anyone else? Here or on Zoom? Oh,
I cannot top my friend Doug's beautiful presentation. This is relating to the second question. What am I hoping for? I'm hoping for a better balance in my own life between my disappointment with the European institutional church that I inherited through my family history, a church that was affiliated with empire. And I'm trying to achieve a better balance because the story in this Emmaus incident that to me is the real lesson. And I've got nothing except the institutional church to guide me in that direction. So I'm going to be more forgiving and tolerant of what I see as some imperfections. And maybe that's a form of spiritual growth. At my age, that's what I'm looking for.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So as I mentioned in my own story, you know, I don't come from the Episcopal Church. I come from a very different tradition. And so when I first joined this church, I was like, yes. And there was this big honeymoon and it's all, this is like awesome and perfect. And what I've been waiting for my whole life and yay. And of course now I'm in seminary too. So it's like all sunshiny. But also just, yes, everything you just said. This is, you know, we are the body of Christ, and there's something mystical and powerful about that, about the global Church of Christ. And this is a messy human institution with all of its frailties and flaws and all the ways that we hurt each other and don't live into what God has actually called us to do. And so, yes, holding that tension is hard. And I think it's important to do it with a lot of patience and a lot of kindness towards ourselves and towards each other. That's because it is a long journey. Yeah. Yes. Online.
Yeah, all of what you just said, Debbie, and what Steve prompted is that Cleopas and the other disciple got to engage this together.
Yeah.
And then they went back to Jerusalem together. And I'd have to test it in my memory, but I think all of the resurrection experiences of Jesus happen in community.
That's right.
So this is the work of community. And we'll say more about that tomorrow morning in the forum time. But we've been doing this work. We're doing this work. We are going to continue to do this work because it is who we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. That's going to be especially important, like in the weeks and months that are coming, which are going to be filled with so much pain and divisiveness. And there's going to be more and more of an urging from the culture to even further widen that gap, to like really just differentiate and to, we have an opportunity here as the church to be profoundly countercultural in this moment, in the ways that Steve, you just said. Yes.
Debbie, thank you so much. What I can't seem to let go is this image of the stranger being invited to the table and then becomes the host. There feels to me like there's such an invitation to me around that. I'll tell you what happened last night. Many of you know I have a gay son who's married and has 2 adopted children. Last night over pizza, he just told us, we don't know that this is going to happen, but we already have a plan to relocate to London if things get really bad. He can do that because he's not an executive, but a manager at Google. And he's already visited the Google office in London. Like, we knew nothing about any of this. So I'm having so much grief about possibly my grandchildren leaving us and, just lots on that. And I'm nowhere near the place where I could invite someone with a MAGA hat to be the host at the dinner table. I'm just not there. But I think that's the invitation. So that's where I am.
Thank you. I think a lot of people are right there with you. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else want to share?
This brought up for me, reminded me, and also what you just spoke to. In my Buddhist background, the definition of love that I was taught that was radical to me was the sincere desire for the well-being and happiness of another. And then I just recently saw a video of our Right Reverend Michael Curry saying essentially the same thing. The desire for well-being. And that we are not commanded to like our neighbor. And that's just can be too much of a tall order, but the commandment and the commitment is love in that definition, wishing for the well-being of another. And I feel like we get so confused by this idea that love means like the Hallmark card, Valentine's Day ideal.
Yeah.
But that if we can, the commandment and the commitment feels less overwhelming and impossible when we can look at it for that wish for the well-being.
Thank
So.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Back to that existentialist upbringing. It's easy for me to have a story of lament about the state of the world and a story about myself, about what I can do. And in my spiritual journey and with a lot of contemplative background, that has changed from more rationalistic to less kind of rationalistic. But it's still about like, okay, here's what I can do, and I have these gifts, so I should do them. But what I feel like I'm missing that the stranger could add is, the context, the why. It's like, am I just doing this because of a kind of like, why not? Or what is the broader, like when he opened the scriptures, what is the broader reason to do good? Other than just like it's a better way. You might be happier that way, but.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to respond to what you were saying about love. That I've learned recently that, well, there's the love of the world. And then there's a love under Christ, who is the light. And I think that sometimes we get confused with the two, especially regarding how we treat our neighbors and the stranger by judging them. And that is not the light. That is not living under Christ. So I try to remind myself of that all the time.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in our culture, we have a very sentimentalized picture of what love is. We don't have a sense of a love that can be more hard-edged, a love that can, yes, focus on well-being and on right action and on, bringing about justice, but also love that provokes, that we love each other too much to leave each other in our complacency, that we will push with gentleness and kindness, but also firmness.
Odetta?
Oh, hi. Yeah, thank you. I wanted to add to the speaker who mentioned coming from a Buddhist tradition and wishing for the well-being of others. And what I wanted to add to that, because it's also, yes, from Buddhist tradition, from 12-step tradition, I think from all the traditions that call us to be in tune with our Christ self, with our God self, to withhold that from another is to do so at our own spiritual peril. That if we, in withholding, and it's not necessary for anybody to be there today because that's a lot to ask, but to remember that when we do that, we are separating ourselves from what is holy and divine in ourselves. And there's, in the 12-step tradition, there's something about resentment that says if you taking wishing for someone or giving someone rat poison or something like that. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's like, oh, a resentment is like being angry, like taking rat poison and expecting the other person to die or get sick.
Withholding forgiveness is like doing that.
Yes, exactly. We're making our own selves sick in that
Right.
process. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it was Anne Lamott maybe who said it, a writer who maybe some of you know. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, yeah. So withholding forgiveness is like eating rat poison and then waiting for the other person to die. Anyone else? Okay. So in these last little bit, so again, if we had more time, I would go through this whole exercise together here. But what I want to do is just give it to you as something to carry with you and to work on over the next few days or months. And so, Greg, if you could pull up the last slide for me. So what I wanted to do is to give you a template to take what we've talked about today and actually at some point when you're ready, craft a full lament. So there are lots of different templates for doing this, and as the scriptures give us many different forms, and this is a common one. You see this general shape in a lot of the Psalms, for example, or in a lot of the prophetic laments. And my reason for doing this is because lament on the one hand is a very spontaneous, very like in the moment expression of pain, and it absolutely has value as that, but can also be very formational in that as we go through these steps of crafting our complaint, we learn so much about ourselves, we learn about what assumptions we have of God, and we learn what we actually want, what it is that we're really hungry for. And we also, I think, if we can get all the way to the end, learn what it means to praise God in the middle of the brokenness, even then. So again, you might not be anywhere near ready to move through all of these today or anytime soon, but I just want to hold it out for you as something to take with you. And so just briefly, let's walk through the different steps. So invocation, this is the actual calling out to God, right? And you can pause just with this for a while and think about, how do you want to address God right now? Who is God to you right now? Is God mother? Is God father? Is God roaring lion? Is God the lamb who's been sacrificed? We have so many different ways of approaching the sacred. And so you might just begin the lament by really thinking about, in this moment, what image or metaphor or picture of God is most resonant for you? And how do you want to begin your lament with a particular calling out to God? And then the complaint and the protest, which can be quite long. You can do many, many, many paragraphs of this if you need to. This is naming the pain, the anger, the sadness, the disappointment, the sense of betrayal, actually putting language to what is breaking you. And once you've done that, then you move into a confession of trust. And this is hard. This is where the formational work can begin, right? Where you begin to go, okay, here I have spoken my complaint. Now let me pull away from that a little bit and think about, what else do I know about God? How might I open up the story a little bit? You might look at your past. You might look at the testimonies of scripture and of the saints. You might look at the larger community that you're a part of and go, what have I known or experienced of God that I can bring to bear on this complaint right now? What can I still trust in, even in this moment? And then petition. And this is a place to be quite specific. What are you asking for? Not so much the thing, not so much the concrete thing, but the assurance you need beneath that. How do you need God to nourish you, fill you, stabilize you? And then finally, the vow to praise. If you look at a lot of the Lamentation Psalms, they end with this, which I'll be honest, when I was growing up, when I would read the endings of those Psalms, I would get really irritated. Like, he said something honest in the beginning, and by the end, he just slaps this like big bow on it, and I just didn't get it. But what's happening here is this is the clinging to the relationship still. Like, I am hurt, I am angry, it's not okay, I need this and this and this and this other thing, but I am still here. I am still here. I'm still going to acknowledge that you are God and I am not, in whatever way I can do that right now. Okay, so are there questions about any part of this? Yes.
I'm thinking that, with the invocation, we could be in a place where we can't, there is no name we want to or need, want name or image that we want to put, or we just know there's God.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, exactly. There doesn't even have to be a name. Not at all. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, tell me your name. Kathy. So Kathy said, you might be in a place where with this invocation, you're not even ready, or you don't even have a particular title or name for God that you want to use. It just feels amorphous, or it's just God in a very generic way. Or maybe there's no specific address, and that's okay. That's okay. Any other questions or responses to this as a form to work with? Okay, so yeah, I do encourage you over the next few days to try it out. At least, get as far as you can. You might just get stuck at complaint and stay there for like the next, I don't know, 4 years. But I do encourage you to push past that and try to make it to the end.
And these will be on slides that will be.
Can we offer the slides for people to like access somehow, like as a PDF? Or?
The slides will be a PDF on the website page where the video will also be uploaded.
Yeah.
The recording of today. Yep.
Yeah, so you'll have that if you want to work with it. Okay. I want to just as a closing offer a blessing for you to carry with you, and this is written by a poet and a painter who I really love, Jan Richardson, whose work you probably know. She writes these really gorgeous blessings for the whole liturgical year and then just for other moments. And so this one is called Blessing in a Time of Violence, which is to say this blessing is always. Which is to say there is no place this blessing does not long to cry out in lament, to weep its words in sorrow, to scream its lines in sacred rage. Which is to say, there is no day this blessing ceases to whisper into the ear of the dying, the despairing, the terrified. Which is to say, there is no moment this blessing refuses to sing itself into the heart of the hated and the hateful, the victim and the victimizer, with every last ounce of hope it has, which is to say, there is none that can stop it, none that can halt its course, none that will still its cadence, none that will delay its rising, none that can keep it from springing forth from the mouths of us who hope, from the hands of us who act, from the hearts of us who love, from the feet of us who will not cease our stubborn, aching marching, until this blessing has spoken its final word, until this blessing has breathed its benediction in every place, in every tongue. Peace, peace, peace. My friends, go gently and God be with you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Debbie. What a wonderful morning. And I think you may know, but Debbie will be our guest preacher tomorrow morning. She's gracious to offer to do the 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 11 o'clock. She and I talked midweek about what needed to be said and who needed to say it this weekend, this Sunday. And my heart says that Debbie's voice is exactly what we need to hear this Sunday. Yeah. She did. So I look forward to it. Let me highlight just a couple of things on the horizon for Wisdom School. Next month, Saturday, December 14th, we will have Sister Miriam Elizabeth Bledsoe from the Order of St. Helena, an Episcopal religious order based out of Augusta, South Carolina, West Augusta, East Augusta, South Carolina, just over the border from Georgia. And a seminary friend of mine, and reconnected in recent years as we've begun to use the Psalter from the Order of St. Helena. And so we're delighted to have her leading a wisdom practice day, a contemplative morning in the context of Advent and Advent expectation and preparation. Then in mid-January, I think it's January 10th and 11th, we have Dr. Joseph Howell offering a workshop on the Enneagram. Whether you're experienced with it or not, it is open, and there will be different ways than we have approached it in past Enneagram workshops. So I commend that to you. And then in February, we have Peter Pearson coming to offer an icon writing workshop. It'll begin on a Thursday evening, Friday evening, and then Saturday. There's information on the Wisdom School webpage about all of that. Lots more to come after that, but let me leave it at that and ask if you would please, before you go, complete one of the feedback evaluations. We've left copies on your table. That helps us learn from our experience and also give feedback to our speakers. Those who are on Zoom have an electronic copy version of that as well. So thank you. And I would only ask additionally if you would just clean your table so that we can prepare for the forum tomorrow morning. We can leave the tables and chairs as they are. All right, go in peace. Thank you very much.